I'm going to introduce to you now Lynda Rose, who is the CEO of Voice for Justice. There's a growing concern that the ability of Christians in the United Kingdom to practice and manifest their faith in public is deteriorating. You have probably read in the newspapers about nurses being actually dismissed from their jobs because they refuse to take off their crucifix. And in many cases, Christians are being openly discriminated against and ridiculed. In October 2023, the Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians was commissioned by Voice for Justice. And evidence from witnesses will be gathered, and the inquiry will publish its preliminary findings in a series of interim reports, probably in the next 18 months. So I'm going to hand you over to Lynda Rose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregory. Well, good morning, everyone. It's very good to be here with you today. Though what I've been asked to talk about, discrimination against Christians, maybe that isn't quite so good, because apart from the obvious spiritual dimension, which obviously impacts me deeply, I have to say I'm an Anglican priest, by the way, so I have a vested interest in this. But at heart, this is an attack on the fundamental rights and values of our society. It's an attack on our democracy. Christianity first came to our shores in AD 43. I don't know if you know that or not, but it was introduced by the Romans. And this was just about 10 years after Christ was crucified. So it has been here for a long time, and it took root. So much so that in 1215, when the barons rebelled against John, their tyrannical king, Christianity was the basis for Magna Carta. And it laid down the principle that the king ruled under God and that he was subject to the law. And it enshrined the protection for the church. One of its provisions was, no free man shall be taken, imprisoned, decised, outlawed, banished, or in any way destroyed, nor will we proceed against or prosecute him, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. Now, those principles, rights, whatever you want to call them, were based on the Bible. And down the centuries, consistently, the Bible has provided the basis for all of our laws, all our laws. For our democracy. It has been the basis for our society and our culture. For centuries, we have been, and we still are actually, a Christian country, a Christian nation. But all that now is very much under threat. And it's something that really should concern all of us, irrespective of whether or not you're a Christian or an atheist or following another religion. It should worry you, because this goes to the heart of our national identity and what we see as our freedoms. Freedom of belief, freedom of speech, the two great cornerstones of our democracy. Today, they are under threat. And it's Christians that are very much in the firing line. But make no mistake, this is something that is threatening every last one of you. Now, Gregory just mentioned, I'm sure you'll have seen reports in the press about Christians being interviewed by the police, being arrested, being disciplined, being sacked from their jobs because they express Christian belief, or quoted from the Bible, or prayed with someone. But you may think that I'm exaggerating. So I think the real question for us this morning is there really discrimination in this country against Christians? Or is the real problem actually just that a few bloody-minded individuals, and please pardon the expression, but is the real problem that these individuals caught in the last century are just whinging because they can't get their own way anymore? You may have your own ideas about that, but the National Secular Society would have us believe that that is exactly the truth. Christians are disproportionately privileged over the rest of the population and have been for centuries, they say. And what's happening now is just redressing the balance, and about time too, so that the rights of everyone are protected equally. And they're actively campaigning to end what they label this unfair privilege. They're calling for a total separation of church and state, and for all trace of Christian influence actually to be removed from public life, from the public arena. If they get their way, people will be free to be Christian because it's an absolute human right to believe whatever you want. But they will not be free to express their faith in public. And as part of that, faith schools have got to go, along with anything that facilitates this perpetuation of what secular activists call narrow-minded and bigoted Christian belief, judgmentalism. And as a part of this push to achieve their aims, they are championing increased freedoms for LGBT groups. Now again, you will have your own views on this. But don't be fooled, because this at heart is part of a deliberate strategy to overturn the values that up to now form the basis for the whole of our society. Thank you. Those values are Christian. But just let me backtrack a little here and tell you a little bit about Voice for Justice UK. We're a Christian campaigning organisation, and we work to defend victims of abuse and exploitation, people who can't speak for themselves. And down the years, we've done a lot of work with family issues, with education, beginning and end of life issues, street violence, trafficking, all these social issues that really do affect society. But over the last few years, our focus has become increasingly centred on protecting and defending Christian rights and freedoms in the UK. And this has not been a deliberate policy shift on our part. But in some ways, we feel it's been forced on us by the growing levels of intolerance and discrimination that are being experienced by Christians. The last few years, we've been contacted by growing numbers of people, of Christians, claiming that they've been unfairly treated because of their faith. They've maybe said something that jarred, trying to care. They'd dared pray with somebody. They'd quoted from the Bible, or they'd used the wrong pronouns. Whatever. They had found themselves being disciplined, overlooked for promotion. Worst case scenario, they'd been sacked, and some had been arrested. Many said that they'd been sent for diversity training, and we've had a lot of complaints about that. Can we help? One or two complained that without warning they'd had their bank accounts closed. And believe it or not, sometimes the people contacting us said that they were in trouble because they had repeated or shared something that they'd read in one of Voice for Justice's mailings, or that they'd taken from our website, or that they don't encourage people on social media to sign one of our petitions. We do a lot of petitions, by the way. Now, I should also say at this point that all of our work at Voice for Justice is backed by research. We are a research-based group, and we draw very heavily on government data and all official statistics, on medical reports. Everything that we say is fully backed, legally, scientifically, and medically. So when people do quote from our resources, they're not putting forward some kind of wacky conspiracy theory, and they're not being deliberately obnoxious, I hope. They are repeating well-validated research backed by government figures, but with assessments that come from a faith perspective. And it was this, we've discovered, that's the problem. Because regardless of whatever evidence there might be, the expression of these kind of views is labelled by some as hatred and bigotry. This is the nub of the problem. The expressed goal of secular activists is to change the character of British society. And when they encounter what they perceive as opposition to this, they are very quick to use the card that in this day and age trumps absolutely anything and everything else. This is hate speech, they scream. This is bigotry. You're discriminating against me. Why do you hate me so? Please make no mistake. The real victims of discrimination today are those who uphold traditional values. The intention behind all these kind of attacks that we're seeing is a deliberate intention to suppress anything that runs counter to the attacker's preferred liberal narrative. And it doesn't make a scrap of difference that the views being expressed are just a statement of belief, or someone was asked what they thought and said, well, okay, I'll tell you. It doesn't make a scrap of difference that they are not intended to be in any way judgmental. These are views that have to be suppressed. Does that sound a bit extreme? Well, take a look at Stonewall's website. Because tucked away amongst all the rhetoric about LGBTQ+ rights and equality, you will find that their stated aim is to create a world where all LGBTQ+ people are free to be themselves. And to achieve this, they state, our campaigns drive positive change in public attitudes and public policy. A bit further on, they say, together we can turn the world we imagine into the world we live in. In other words, Stonewall is actively and overtly working to bring about political and social change. And they're not alone in this. They may be the biggest offender, but there are lots of other groups with similar aims on their coattails pushing the same agenda. And they are all using this deliberate strategy to try and suppress the views of people who, for whatever reason, and again, it doesn't matter if they're based on belief or whatever, but people who disagree or appear to be being critical of what they're saying. And who are the main offenders here? They're Christians, because all forms of sexual immorality are prohibited in the Bible. The Bible upholds the creation of men and women and of marriage. So actually it's not really very surprising that Christians have become an object of attack here. Secular activists have actually waged an extremely successful campaign in our culture to undermine the traditional values which up to now have been the cornerstone of our society. And one of the rather depressing spin-offs to this campaign is that public bodies such as the police, policymakers, government, mainstream media, they no longer seem to give weight to complaints by Christians of marginalisation or discrimination. And it actually feels like they've bought into this lie that Christians are the privileged group. And how on earth, if they're a privileged group, can they be discriminated against? But the evidence is mounting. And that's why around 18 months ago, Voice for Justice decided to try and find out what was really going on and to set the record straight. And that was why we launched the commission. Well, we didn't launch it then, it took us a while to put it together. But we began to think about the Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians, CIDAC. And we decided that we would invite testimony from Christians who felt that they had been put in any way at a disadvantage because of their faith. Any Christians. We didn't want just asking for the big cases. We wanted grassroots Christians to tell us what was happening. And from the start, our aim was to hold a really impartial and objective investigation. And we promised that we would report our findings honestly. So that if we found out that the complaints were grossly inflated or misleading or actually just plain barking, we promised to say so. We decided that the inquiry would run for a minimum of 2 years, and that at the end we would submit, there would be interim reports, yes, and one is about to be published this coming week, but at the end of the inquiry, we will submit a report of our findings to Parliament, along with recommendations for appropriate action. And from the start, we haven't been thinking about calling for a change in the law, because actually, UK law, if it's correctly applied, already protects religious freedom and freedom of speech. But we want to stop the misapplication of this law. We want to stop the law being applied selectively and of one group being ignored or marginalised. So we're hoping that our report will prompt a reassessment and restatement of the law so that the climate of intolerance that we've got at the moment stops. So CIDAC was formally launched in October last year. We're now about halfway through, we think. But ahead of the launch of the inquiry, we put out a survey, The Costs of Keeping the Faith. And we sent it out asking ordinary Christians what they thought about this issue and whether or not they personally might have experienced any kind of disadvantage, intolerance, discrimination, whatever. We wanted to know whether they felt that Christians were being disadvantaged because of their faith, or if actually grassroots Christians thought that this was all a bit over-exaggerated, a bit of hype, just ignore it. We were actually totally unprepared for the results. We had 1,562 responses. If we had kept it open for longer, we would have had a lot more. But we wanted a quick response ahead of the inquiry. There's a detailed report of the findings of the survey on our website, Voice for Justice UK, and that's www.vfjuk.org. So you can have a look at it there. and I would encourage you to, please. But to summarise the findings, we found that 38% of under 35s felt that their freedom of speech was restricted. 56 to 61% of respondents had experienced hostility and ridicule if they expressed Christian or religious beliefs. Over half of under 35s felt that there were negative stereotypes of Christians at their place of work, and 78% believed religious discrimination was not being treated as seriously as other forms of discrimination. And I'll let you fill in the blanks there, what they might have been thinking. Nick Fletcher, who was at the time MP for Doncaster, though he's since very sadly lost his seat, he wrote the foreword to our report, and one thing he said was, "We all need to wake up to the attack on Christianity in our society before it turns into something even more sinister. This report is a vital step in sounding the alarm." And what the survey does actually clearly reveal is that the UK, for all our claims to be tolerant and inclusive, blah, 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 we are actually an intolerant and increasingly bigoted society, actively suppressing the manifestation and expression of Christian belief in public. This was also the finding, by the way, of a 2019 report by the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe. And in their report, they placed the UK as one of the top 5 most intolerant countries for discrimination against Christians. And again, I really would encourage you to take a look at their website. It's a distinction that we could well do without. I should just add, by the way, that Nick Fletcher was a tremendous Christian advocate and a friend in Parliament, and he was going to sponsor the launch of our report at the conclusion of the inquiry, and we now have to find someone to replace him. So, a quick plea here. If any of you know any Christian MPs in our current godless Parliament who would be willing to put their head above the parapet and host the launch in Parliament of our report, please let me know, because we're having some difficulties finding active Christians at the moment in Parliament. Time is marching on. For the last part of my talk, to give some idea of the scale of the problem, I just thought it'd be good to share some of the evidence that's been given over this past year before CIDAC. As I said, there will be an interim report published hopefully this week, but if not, it will be the week after at the latest. And it will be published on both the Voice for Justice websites and our CIDAC website. But we'll also, of course, be putting it out in the national press. So please do look out for that. And also, of course, if you do go to our CIDAC website, you'll find all the details for the organisation of the inquiry, along with reports for past hearings, how to submit evidence, etc. But the main thing I think for you to know here at the moment is that all hearings take place via Zoom before a panel of commissioners who have been specially selected for their expertise and experience on human rights issues. Some commissioners are legally qualified, but others are drawn from a variety of backgrounds, including journalism and the charitable sector, but all have experience of dealing with human rights issues. Most of these hearings are open to the public, so if you'd like to listen to one sometime, on the CIDAC website you'll find details to apply to our Commission Secretary to join one of the hearings. As I say, most of these hearings are public, but for reasons of sensitivity or ongoing legal proceedings, some are being held in camera. And the report hearings for those are not being made public, although they will be included in the formal report to Parliament. But over the course of this last year, we've heard 17 hearings so far. We've also been contacted by many of the respondents to the survey, all claiming to have experienced intolerance, disadvantage, discrimination on account of their faith. So this really is just the tip of an extremely large iceberg. Witnesses, and those who we've currently got in the pipeline at the moment, represent a very wide spectrum of Christian belief, and they are drawn from all denominations in the UK. Some of the cases are actually quite extraordinary, to me, unbelievable. But to give you a little bit of a flavour, just in the last few minutes, I'm going to go through a few of them. So one of our witnesses was James Bland, a volunteer teaching assistant at a local primary school, who enrolled on a part-time teacher training course. As a part of this course, he was required to attend a diversity, equity and inclusion day. And it was quite normal, actually. When he got there, he discovered that this was focused exclusively on transgender and sexuality issues, but mainly transgender, which didn't actually please him too much, but he was a good boy while the course ran on. But chatting privately to some of his fellow students afterwards, as they were kind of going for coffee or whatever, he made the comment that he thought transgender stuff was a load of nonsense. He thought he was with friends. But one of his friends then reported him to the course director, and he was put under investigation. He felt compelled to withdraw from the course. So that really did put a stop to his dreams of becoming a teacher. Another of our cases, Aaron Edwards, and you may have read about some of these in the press. I'm just picking out some of the ones that I think you might have heard about. Aaron Edwards was a lecturer in theology at a Methodist evangelical college in Bristol. And he tweeted on his private account, "Homosexuality is a sin invading the church. Evangelicals no longer see the severity of this because they're too busy apologising for the apparently barbaric homophobia. This is a gospel issue. For if sin is no longer sin, we no longer need a saviour." Now, if you are Christian, you will know that this actually is pretty much, it's just Christian doctrine. It kind of goes without saying. So, it's actually not that big a deal. The college, the Methodist Evangelical College, took a different view, and he was sacked. He was told that his views did not reflect their ethos of inclusivity. Aaron was a little bit gobsmacked by this, and he argued that an academic should be able to speak freely, and that the college environment should encourage discussion based on a free and frank exchange of views, without fear of reprisal from those who disagreed. He would have welcomed the chance to talk with people who maybe disagreed. Well, the college disagreed big time, but they weren't prepared to talk about it. He was threatened with being reported to Prevent for hate speech, and he was sacked. And he is at the moment seeking legal redress. His case is on appeal. Calvin Robinson, another of our witnesses, is a deacon in the Free Church of England. He has a background in teaching, so he was invited to serve on the Education Subcommittee of the Royal Academy of Dance. And he enjoyed it. It was really great. But trouble started after he was verbally and physically attacked while protesting outside a drag queen event being held at Lewisham Library. Protesters, and I understand there were quite a lot of them, Protesters claiming to demand inclusivity and tolerance shouted slogans, "Drag queens are welcome, vicars are not, go away." They actually physically assaulted Calvin as well. This got into the papers, and as a result, Calvin was dismissed by the Academy for the expression of views deemed in conflict with its core values. Now, a little bit of background to this. There had been some disagreement within the Education Subcommittee in the weeks leading up to this happening over the stance to be taken towards the inclusion of transgender students at the Royal Academy of Dance. Think about it. Calvin had maintained the position in line with his faith and supported by a large number of students at the Academy that female dancers should be female. Maybe you think that goes without saying, you poor innocents. That week, when this report appeared in the paper, when he was dismissed, the RAD website was completely, that's Royal Academy of Dance website, was completely changed to carry a large rainbow flag on the home page in celebration of Pride, with a dedicated LGBTQI+ section. Calvin took legal action against RAD for harassment and for direct and indirect discrimination on the grounds of his Christian belief. And he received an out-of-court settlement of £8,000. There are a lot of other cases that I wish I had time to mention, but I don't think I have got time.
No.
And I really do encourage you to go to our website and to download the interim reports so that you can read them for yourselves. But it would seem clear from these cases that the freedom to practice and manifest Christian belief in the UK is being progressively reduced, and even on occasion is being deliberately ignored. Without any shadow of doubt, Christian belief in this nation is under attack. Doesn't matter if you're Christian or not, Christian belief is under attack. And there is emerging evidence of orchestrated opposition to Christian belief. For all the boasts of tolerance, inclusivity, diversity, and how wonderful we all are, such acceptance is not being extended towards Christians. And in fact, for believers, what we're seeing is an ever-increasing realm of punishable activities. So whether it's flippant remarks made to friends, which you think no one's going to be bothered about, whether it's quoting from the Bible, expressing support for traditional marriage, silent prayer, walking down the street, questions being asked in what you thought was an alleged safe place, tweets, Facebook, all these things today for Christians can become an avenue of attack. As I said at the beginning, this is part of a far broader strategy to undermine and overturn the values on which all of our society, our culture, our laws, our democracy are built. The growing climate of discrimination and intolerance towards Christians is only the first outworking of what is actually an ideological battle to take control. We have to recognise that, and we have to resist it.